Hey everyone, and welcome to the premiere episode of the 5v5 podcast, where my lifelong friend Mike Cusanelli and I bring our top 5 lists to each show where we discuss various topics in popular culture. This is Larry Gendron. Mike and I decided to do this podcast to share some of the passion we have for music, films, and more with all of you. In this episode, we discuss the solo careers of all 4 members of the Beatles. After the Fab Four called it quits, John, Paul, George, and Ringo continued to collaborate, compete, and combat with one another. We each picked our 5 favorite songs from their vast catalogs of solo material to discuss. So this is me and Mike talking about the Beatles solo. I think it all starts with the Beatles for me.
Yeah, I agree. And you know, this actually one thing I didn't mention, which I thought of this morning, you and I talked briefly about, is we kind of started doing this type of thing in high school. I'd give you music to a cassette or to take home with you, and you'd give me something, and try to challenge each other with different things. And we were in a band together for about 2 weeks.
Back when making mixtapes on cassette, like the thing. And
exactly.
We were born right when the Beatles broke up, so
that's true.
A lot of this solo material is kind of hardwired into us, and just our, just being around siblings and
well, you have older siblings, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I just grew up with it all being kind of hardwired into me, and I just think that it kind of moved forward from there. Yeah, I mean, just all the, and especially with John's anniversary just happening, and
yeah, I was just gonna say that sadly, it was just a couple days ago that it was the 40th anniversary of John Lennon's death. He's been dead pretty much as long as he was alive now, and it's a sad anniversary. And it's one of those things you think of as, okay, if he had survived that, or if it hadn't happened, what would he be doing? What would his path have been? I mean, in my mind, you look at Paul McCartney, Paul and John being the main creative force in the Beatles. You look at Paul, and he's kind of the patron saint of today's top pop singer-songwriters, the Taylor Swifts, who he's just on the Rolling Stone cover with, and Ed Sheeran and people like that.
Yeah, Ryan Tedder.
Right. Who would John be the patron saint of if he had survived and was still making music now? To me, I can picture him neck deep in that whole grunge movement in the 90s, the grunge and early indie rock movement of the 90s. I could see him neck deep in that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, obviously Neil Young kind of became like the godfather of grunge, and I think that's one of the things about the film that just came out, is, spoiler alert if anybody hasn't seen that film, but I think one of the most amazing scenes in that movie was the scene with John, because you're watching it with that mindset of like,
right.
What would have happened, or what would it be like if he hadn't
I found that movie was okay. I mean, it was corny at times and stuff. It was well made, but that scene, I teared up.
That scene was the one that hit me, and I didn't really expect that, and it was pretty powerful.
Yeah, I agree. I just, the fact that, and I don't care, spoilers, go watch the movie, dummies. The fact that he was still an artist. He was still living the artist life, yet he wasn't famous, but he was still living an artist life. He looked like you would expect, him to look. He looked like the way I want to be when I'm 70, I
was thinking about that scene just now, and it reminded me of, the ending of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and it had that same kind of vibe, that kind of ghostly, kind of,
what
if, yeah.
Right. I agree. I forgot all about, in the whole preparation of this, I forgot all about that movie. That's just to watch. I'm going to go back and just rewatch that last 10 minutes just of that part of the movie, because
that's really the part
powerful.
that I really care about. I mean,
I find, with that in mind, and the absence of John, going back, I said to you this a couple times while we were prepping for this, going back and listening to a ton of Beatles solo work in a lot deeper than I have in a long time. It's kind of disappointing, their solo work, because you can't help obviously compare it back to the Beatles, and you just find yourself going, yeah, it's almost there. it's almost,
Well,
but
it just showed you the power that especially the three of them had. All due respect to Ringo, I'm speaking more from a songwriting standpoint. The power that they had as a trio, as writers, and then obviously as a band, um, and that unit, with George Martin and all of the people that assisted and all of that. It You fragmented that out, and it's on their own they were either left without, like John was left without Paul to kind of be that counterbalance, and we'll talk about this more. There were some people still involved, and George and John
right,
kind of
more
were.
so with George and John and
Yeah,
Ringo than with
yeah,
Paul. Paul didn't really do that.
definitely, yeah.
Yeah, I think with Ringo, I thought of this morning. Ringo's like there's a sitcom in the 90s or 80s that was humongous. And some of the actors went on to have huge movie careers or other sitcoms or shows. But there's always that one guy who was like a cultural phenomenon who had like the catchphrase. And Ringo's kind of the rerun of the Beatles. Like he could get on a reality shows, like those guys. Screech could always get on a reality show anytime he wanted, but he's never really going to have another hit show or anything like that.
We're kind of pigeonholed, yeah.
Yeah, Ringo just kind of like he kind of says it sometimes. He goes, "I just fell backwards into this thing. It just happened." He goes, "I was just lucky to be surrounded by these guys." And he's parlayed it obviously into a huge career, and he's still a cultural icon.
He's still going, man. He looks great.
He looks great. Yeah, hair dye and beard dye can do wonders.
But he's thin. He looks better
good.
than me.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, the thing about Ringo,
he's the oldest, right?
Yeah, and the thing about Ringo that I think a lot of people forget is, he didn't have a click track back then.
Right.
That was him keeping that.
Well, he's also dealing with all the rumors of, Ringo didn't really play drums on that song. He didn't really play drums on that song. He didn't do fills. So every time you hear a fill,
I know.
I
thought about that. I definitely thought about that, and I think this is kind of my counter argument to that. If John and Paul didn't think Ringo was good enough, he wouldn't have been in the band.
Exactly.
That says a lot right there.
Exactly. They would have hired the guys that they used later. The Jim Keltner.
Right.
Keltner would have been in the Beatles.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, any of those guys back then. But Ringo, and the thing about Ringo, it's another thing. I mean, people can go look on YouTube, but there's a great interview with him where he's kind of, I think he might have been with Dave Stewart of the Eurythmics, but he was basically talking about how he was playing on a right-handed kit, but he's left-handed. So that influenced his feel. It influenced the way, there's just that subtle little offbeat kind of, accents he was doing that, people don't realize or give him enough credit for. And,
for sure.
I think if you go back and listen to some of that stuff like Ticket to Ride, and I mean, it's amazing.
Yeah, no, for sure. And the drummer, as you're a musician. I'm not a musician, but I work in the music business, and I've been in a lot of recording sessions. The drummer takes the brunt of the grief always in a recording session. The drummer has the most difficult job, and he's held to the highest standard by the producer generally.
Because without a great drum track and a great rhythm section, that's where it all begins and ends. I mean,
yeah. I always think back to that Petty documentary, Tom Petty documentary, where Jimmy Iovine is just killing, what's his name for the original Heartbreakers
Stan
drummer.
Lynch.
Yeah, he's trying to make him quit. He's trying to make him quit. He wants to bring somebody in to play drums, and he's trying to make the guy quit, and you can tell it's just brutal.
I think that was the Refugee, where they did like well over 40 takes because they were tracking live.
That's another thing to go back. And the good thing about streaming is all these things are up, and you don't have to watch the entire thing to find that part. You can just fast forward.
Yeah.
and also thinking about each guy's career before we go into the songs. To me, George, in his post Beatles career, being mostly left out of the collaboration, at least as far as writing songs goes. I mean, obviously he was very involved in the development of the songs, but his writing songs, he kind of was the most collaborative Beatle as a solo artist. I mean, the concert for Bangladesh, I think about that. I think about the movie company he started putting out Monty Python movies, Traveling Wilburys. I mean, he working with Clapton, he worked with Ringo and he worked with John on his stuff and vice versa. So, he seemed to be the one that went out and, wanted to keep working with different people and he wanted to have a solo career, but he also wanted to just be a well-rounded, guy in the scene too.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And he, you could say he was a late bloomer as a writer, but it's amazing when, doing a little research for this, the amount of material he had saved up and a lot of the things
that whole first
the
solo
Beatles, album. Yeah. I mean, the amount of material he saved and the things that the Beatles turned down.
Right.
It's kind of surprising.
Right. So let's dig in. So to go back, so as we said from the top, subject this week is this episode is the Beatles solo careers. We each pick 5 songs, and we're each going to kind of give an overview and make the case for that song. Argue for why it's it is top 5, and any kind of personal anecdotes we have or anything that associated with the song, and just give a quick overview and discuss each song as we go. So Lou, why don't you go first? Why don't you give me I don't know if we said this, we may have. I don't know what Lou's songs are. He doesn't know what my songs are. So this is a surprise. We wanted to keep it that way so there wasn't time for either of us to come up with our counter arguments.
Should we just get this out of the way right off the top and talk about Imagine?
Yeah, it's not my 5. I told you before.
It's not. Well, it's not
that
in my
song
5,
is now,
I know it's not in your 5. In your top 5.
The song's the property of American Idol, as far as I'm concerned. Every season of any of those singing shows, somebody's going to sing Imagine and destroy it. Not understand that people. It's one of those songs. It's like Bruce Springsteen, Born in the USA. People don't understand what it was about. It's not what people think it's about. It's not some spiritual Christian song, which artists seem to turn it into. CeeLo Green sang it once on some stupid charity show, and he took out "What if there was no God?" He took that line out, which is disrespectful, frankly. But yeah, that song to me is like "It's a Wonderful World." Everybody sings it. It's every karaoke night. Some jerk is going to sing that song. And it's just, I don't need to hear it ever again in my entire life.
Yeah, I mean, it's thinking back to when John passed, and in that moment, listening to that song, it was, it was so sad. But all these years removed from that, it feels like it's no longer John's song. And it's become this other thing.
It's become this spiritual anthem, which like I said, it's like "This Land is Our Land" by Woody Guthrie. People sing that song like some patriotic song. It's not a patriotic song. It was one of the most rebellious songs ever recorded.
Yeah,
about at a time where
sarcastic.
Hey, we own this country. We the people own this country, not you, the corporations, and which is kind of what we have been going through since the start of this country. Now it's embraced as some song kids learn in kindergarten and sing, but read the second and third verses. It's a subversive song. Imagine's similar. It's like, hey, put all your bullshit aside. Imagine if you could put it all aside and just be people together, just be organisms on this planet. And
yes,
it just
it was very minimalist. To strip it all away.
Right.
And I think I say all this out of respect to the song and John as a writer. But I just don't find myself listening to it on the regular,
No, I changed it. I'm not a big radio guy, but or anything like that anyway. But if it comes on a playlist, I skip it. I don't need to hear
Yeah.
it. It makes me
Yeah.
angry.
And I think,
'Cause
do you think it's just because we've heard it so many years? And
I think it's that, and it's the co-opt of it by people who don't understand what it means. It's just, it's frustrating um,
I think for me
when
too,
anything
like,
becomes so mainstream that it loses. It's just white noise, and it's just
I think for me too, like I associate it with his death and
Yeah, I can
in
see
those
that. Yeah,
feelings,
yeah,
and
yeah.
the same with Double Fantasy as a whole. Like, because I remember when he died, and my sister just put the album on and played it nonstop and cried.
I bet. Yeah, because that's true in your house. I mean, I was 11 years old, so I
Yeah,
mean, I remember it, but I don't remember it being a big part of my household.
yeah,
Not as much as a few years earlier when Elvis died. It was a bigger deal in my house. But anyway, so
yeah.
we'll
Okay,
take these side paths as we go. But let's.
yeah.
Why don't you start? Give me your
All right,
first
so
song, so
I'm gonna
I
throw
can
you a
disagree with
curveball
you.
right out of the gate.
All right, go.
Um, so my number five is Silly Love Songs.
Ah.
And what's
Did you
interesting, I
spread them
never.
around, by the way? Did you spread the songs around? Because I made an
No,
effort.
no, I didn't go. I didn't pick anything based on like trying to spread the
Be
love,
fair, you didn't want to.
out.
I couldn't
Yeah,
help myself. My OCD forced me to do that. But
yeah. Well, I mean, just doing this whole top five thing is, I'm a compulsive list maker, so I've made like 50 variations of these lists, and you know,
all right, so silly love songs,
yeah.
your
So
first
silly
song.
love songs. I actually was surprised. I didn't realize Linda co-wrote the song with Paul.
Ah, you sure about that?
Well, she's
She's
credited.
got a credit. I mean, okay, you know, she's got a. Uh, we'll talk later about
Yeah, I mean,
Beatles' significant others, but
yeah.
come on. I mean,
Um, but yeah, I mean, it's definitely, it's Paul's kind of response to John and all the critics, accusing him of being cheesy. So he's like, fine, I'll
probably.
literally write a song called Silly Love Songs. But,
What year is that song?
that came out in 76.
Yeah, so
So
it's
it was
probably
a few years
focused on one
after.
person. It's focused on one person
Oh
who
yeah.
criticized him for writing
Yeah.
stupid
Of course it
songs.
is. Yeah,
Yeah,
it was the FU back to John.
for sure.
Um but but I mean, I
And
mean,
Team John in general, which is not terms they used then. But then, if it was today, it
yeah.
would be
But
are
I
you
mean,
Team John or Team Paul?
it went to number one. Say what you will about that, but that's not too
It's a
shabby.
time. It was it's a time in the charts when there was a lot of there was disco and there was a lot of different things going on. Well, not quite disco in '76, I guess, but it's hard to get to number one with a record, especially then when the radio meant something, and
Right.
it's not easy. So
Right. And I mean, there's some elements of obviously there's some Beach Boys influence on the song. God Only Knows is Paul's favorite song. And the other thing is the song is just really hooky. I
it
mean,
is. Yeah.
it's
It's got that effect on the voice. It's kind of got a vocal effect that it's not quite an echo, but it kind of.
yeah, it's definitely, I think, out of all the Beatles solo material, Paul's stuff to me sounds the most like home demos. It's
Because they were. I think
it's got that kind of, and it's definitely has that very 70s, like the kick drum on the,
right.
it's really really kind of compressed in a specific way that
Yeah, that's in my
similar to like
head.
the
That
Eagles had for Henley's drum sound.
Yeah, that drum sound's in my head from that song for sure. Because I just playing it in my head as you're talking about it, and
Yeah.
yeah, no,
And one of the
that's a good song.
and the funny thing about this too is like, there's not a lot of like not a lot of factoids that I pulled up about the track specifically. One of the guys on playing horns, Howie Casey, played sax on the song. He worked with the Who and T-Rex and
That's
other
not a
bands.
wing. That's not a wing song. Is it a wing song?
It's a Wings song, yeah. And that's the other thing
Which
too is I
album is it?
noticed Paul was the only Beatle that went right into having a band.
A couple years after he did a couple. He
You
did
know,
the self-titled and Ram.
yeah. I mean, but like like it wasn't Paul McCartney and Wings. It
Well,
was. I
listen,
mean, it
he
was, I
wanted the
guess, but
Beatles to keep going. He didn't want to. He quit first, maybe, but he didn't want the Beatles to break up. He wanted to be. He always wanted to be in a band.
yeah. What I mean is like it felt like Wings was a real band, and he approached it that way rather
Yeah,
than it's me with a bunch of supporting people.
right. Then he would always get one song on
Yeah.
the albums.
Right.
Linda might, Linda, I think that's when he was forcing Linda into do it. I always felt like Linda didn't even really want to do it. She's just like, all right, whatever.
Well, I mean, it's like, well, you're coming with me anyway on the tour, so we might
Right.
as well play
We have the
keyboards
same haircut. We might as well.
Yeah, yeah. So anyway, that's my
That's
intro.
your first one.
I figured I'd surprise you with that one.
No, it's not a surprise. That song it's a great song. If I had to, out of the blue, I was thinking it was later than that too. It really has a sensibility of what he started to do in the '80s a little bit more than at that time. All right, so my first song is not going to shock you because I've said this before we decided to do this podcast. I non sequitured you with an email or a text or something about this. But I will contend, and my list isn't necessarily in order of my favorites, but I will contend this song is the single best Beatles solo song. And which is odd because it's also the guy with the single worst Beatles solo song. Ringo Starr, It Don't Come Easy.
Wow.
The song's amazing. And I think so it came out in 1971. It was a very early solo Beatles track. It was only a single. It never was on an album until like a best of like 4 or 5 years later. To me, the song sounds like it could have been on Let It Be. Like it was a leftover, because Let It Be is what? Just a bunch of leftovers, right? Or that they crammed together and called an album. So to me, it sounds like it could have been that. And probably because it is co-written, even though he's uncredited, by George Harrison. And it's got a kind of spiritual nature in that last verse, which you can tell that's all George. It's just like the verse in that song "Badge" by Clapton that is completely silly for no reason, and then you find out Ringo wrote that that verse, and you're like, oh, yeah. Okay, makes sense. It got the number 4 in the U.S. and the UK. They recorded it with George Harrison, produced the demos. Klaus Voormann on bass, and Klaus shows up like almost every.
Klaus is everywhere.
Every George project, every John Lennon project, he shows up. So the final version though was recorded at Trident with Keltner is on it. Jim Keltner doesn't play drums on it; he plays like maracas on it. Gary Wright, who was on every George solo thing, plays piano on it. And a couple members from Badfinger are on the track as well. And Badfinger was a group who recorded on Apple Records as well. Stephen Stills is on the demo too, playing piano. So to me, that's why maybe that's why it resonates with me, because it sounds like it could have been a Beatles song. And if it was if it had been a Beatles song, it certainly would be the best Ringo Beatles song, because the Ringo Beatles songs are like kids music. It's the worst. But
yeah.
And Gary Wright, by the way, I do have a little story about Gary Wright. Several years ago, Gary Wright was looking for a distribution deal to distribute the catalog he owns and some new music. And I had lunch with him and his wife. And the guy's just a wonderful human being. And one of George Harrison's, if not his best friend. I believe he was there with George the day George passed away. So he just Gary Wright is a footnote in rock and roll history, but a very important footnote if people want to look him up, and not only his own solo work, but the records he plays on is just insane.
So how was the lunch? I mean, did you?
It was, he was at a Beatles convention. He was he had a booth at a Beatles convention, or he was speaking or something in somewhere in Westchester at some hotel, like White Plains or something. So I just drove down, and it's surreal to think back on it. Then you're just like, whatever, Gary Wright. But you think back on it, and he was a lovely, lovely man, and we got on really well. It's just it didn't work out, unfortunately. But he's just a real lovely person, and a very important person in the history of rock and roll. without a doubt, especially in the
Yeah.
60s and 70s.
Yeah, there's so many of these, so many of these musicians, that were part of these sessions that, like you said, are kind of footnotes, and yet they brought so much.
Yeah. And Ringo played the song, Ringo performed the song first time ever live at the Concert for Bangladesh at Madison Square Garden. So, to me, you can't not listen to it. It's just a great song. And it's probably, there's no doubt in my mind reflecting on it that it's because it's very Beatle-y. It's the most Beatle-y of the solo work, really. So that's my first track. So Silly Love Songs versus Don't Come Easy. So what's your next one?
So number 4 for me is Jealous Guy. It's I think it's one of the most commonly
Jealous
recorded.
Guy, John Lennon, Jealous Guy.
Yeah, and I think it's one of the most commonly recorded songs that John wrote. I think
Maybe.
there are over 90 covers of this song. For me,
who's done the song? I can't think of anybody.
Well, for me, the best cover, my favorite cover was by Donny Hathaway.
Oh, okay.
I love that live album of his anyway. But he does a great version of it on that live album. So John recorded Jealous Guy in 1971 at Ascot Sound.
With Phil, it's a Phil Spector, right?
Yeah. So I think we need to talk about Phil Spector.
Talk about Phil Spector, yeah, well,
because of his involvement with John and George.
Phil Spector, who's famously shot a woman in the face and is now in jail for it. That woman, by the way, plays the weird biology teacher's wife in Fast Times at Ridgemont High. That's the woman. That's the woman Phil Spector shot in the face. Yes.
I did not know that.
Yeah. So Phil Spector, notorious. If you don't know about Phil Spector and his,
that's a whole separate podcast.
He also did the first 2 George Harrison solo albums.
Yeah. This going back to George for a second. Phil went over to George's house, and George was like, "Yeah, I've got a few things to play for you," and he just kept pulling out song after song after song, and and so yeah. Phil's, for better or for worse, Phil was involved with a lot of their solo recordings, and I have my own opinion on that.
Well, I think he was an easy transition probably for them from a George Martin situation, because of the multi-tracking and the layers of sound. Phil Spector, the inventor of the wall of sound, and and strings, use of strings and orchestral, and that kind of stuff. It seems like an odd choice for me for John Lennon, frankly, who's kind of the most punk rock of the Beatles.
Yeah, that's so that's kind of one of my things, is that when Yoko and Sean and when they started releasing some of the stripped down recordings of John's stuff, that's when I felt like I was really hearing what I wanted to hear. Like I respect Phil as a producer, and what he created and all of that. But most of John's solo work for me is better without all of the strings and all of the big.
Yeah, I agree.
Orchestral.
And also for this song, without the whistling, please. That ruins the song for me.
Yeah.
The whistle solo.
John, the funny thing about John is he's like one of the best whistlers I've ever heard on.
It is odd. And the documentary Imagine, which if you've not seen, you must see it. Which came out early 90s, I think, late 80s. There's the footage of him recording that song and the whistle solo, and I wish the discussion of the inclusion of the whistling was in there, because where did that come from? Like, was he like, I really want to do something that Bing Crosby would do? Where did that thought come? Of a whistling solo.
I know. You think of it in terms of like, okay, it's part of a demo because it's to kind of just it's a placeholder for some other instrument that he wants,
Yeah,
and
I can
it works
see that
in other
in a demo.
stuff, but
where it also doesn't work? Guns N' Roses' Patience.
Yeah.
Where did that? This is a hard heavy metal, not really heavy metal, more like a punk metal rock band making their first real studio record, and there's a whistling solo? Like, how does Slash put up with that? How does Duff McKagan, who comes from a punk rock background, go, yeah, that's a good choice? I mean, they must have been, nobody was in the studio that day but Axl. Like, how
Yeah.
did that even happen?
It got slipped in there. Well, and the fact that it got left in. Yeah.
Right.
But, I think,
There had to have been an argument. There's no way there was no argument about that.
yeah, like, I mean, I think what John whistles in Two of Us, which is great because it's that kind of song,
It's just weird, though. It's just
but
I'm a
yeah,
whistler myself, and my wife and children hate it, but
I can't whistle.
I I just find it so off-putting in a song. It just instantly makes the song corny. It could be a punk rock song, by The Damned about abortion, and as soon as you start whistling, you're like, "What is this? Frosty the
Yeah.
Snowman?
Well,
What the hell's going
that's why I
on?"
was saying it's to me it almost feels like a placeholder that got left in.
Yeah, I think it is.
But
They're like, you know what? That was cool. That whistling really worked. I mean, you
yeah,
know what? Cocaine's a powerful drug. I think
yeah,
that's really what it comes down to.
well, nobody said no to him. That's too many yes people around. But I mean, what the song, what's interesting about the song is that he started writing it in '68 when they were, visiting the Maharishi, and that I think it kind of came from there, but got rewritten over the years until it ended up with the lyrics for Jealous
Well,
Guy.
and the song makes sense too, just John from a personal place, because John previously had written a couple songs about smacking women. You Gotta Run is basically about, if you're not going to date me anymore, I'm going to murder you. So, and John, there always was rumors of him being a little physical with the ladies. So, maybe that to me, it's somewhat of a statement of that. Like, I'm sorry I smacked you because, this is just how I am.
And
This
and
seems
that's
like
the thing
something
about
that would be
John
on
is,
Cops.
as John had his dark side, you've got these melodies that are just so, soaring and just beautiful, and so it was, and sometimes in the same song, he's singing about some really dark things, but with these beautiful melodic, phrases, and so it's a really the contrast really stands out. What do you
All
got for
right,
your
so
number
your
four?
number two is Jealous Guy, John Lennon. All right, so my second song is a Paul McCartney song, and it's my favorite Paul McCartney song. Pretty much, I think, yeah, I could say that. It's my favorite Paul McCartney song. Heart of the Country from 1971 from Ram. It's a simple kind of ditty, but it's kind of a post hippie idealist kind of song. I love it. I don't know why I love it, but I listen to it constantly, and I never get tired of it. It's always fresh. Um, it's credited to Paul and Linda as the writers, which okay, whatever. She maybe
Hey,
was in the room. Um, it's mostly done in this record, Ram. The first record with the cherry spilling out of the bowl, that one he did. You can, if you listen closely to that record, he did that by himself at his farmhouse,
yeah,
and you can hear the kids and the dogs barking and stuff in the back. This record he made in the studio. Critics hated this record. John Lennon.
John made fun of the cover.
John referred to it as "Muzak to my ears" on "How Do You Sleep at Night," which is the
Yeah,
notorious, I hate Paul McCartney song. Ringo says, Ringo said, even Ringo didn't like it. Ringo said, I don't think there's a good tune on that record, is basically what he said. Nobody liked that. The critics hated it. Everybody hated it. And you listen to the record all the way through. It's not the greatest. It's all right. It's a little corny. It's corny for sure. But to me, it's kind of the Beatles bridge song from between what he was doing with the Beatles and some of those kind of more simple songs he was doing, like Rocky Raccoon or Obla Di Obla Da. And then his later, bridging to the later real poppy stuff like Silly Love Songs and like a song like Coming Up that he did not much longer after. It's just a great song. I just
Can I
love the
just can
song.
I just say something? You are definitely surprising me so far with this list. I did not expect
I
you to be
listen. I
like,
challenge anybody to go back and anybody who's a Beatles fan to go back and listen to that song and not love it.
you're
Now,
getting a little soft in your old age.
no, I've always loved that song. It's just, but it's one of those songs that you wouldn't know unless you seek it
I
out.
know, I just thought you were gonna come out of the gate like full guns blazing, just
No,
all
I
into
just think
the.
it's I don't know. To me, it's like Clapton's "Let It Grow." I just love that song. It's just not a song people think of when they think of Eric Clapton. It doesn't have some raring guitar solo on it or anything. It's just a beautiful sentiment, and it's in that time where I remember, you and I went to the same elementary school, and it was New Hampshire at that time, early '70s, was in a full on. It's not the '60s anymore hangover. I mean, we're surrounded by hippies. And it
The
was like
hangover
it might as
decade.
well have been 1968 and 1970 in Claremont, New Hampshire in 1974, and especially our elementary school, which was experimenting with alternative education and stuff. We called all the teachers by their first names. You remember that?
Oh
You're
yeah.
like in
No, well,
kindergarten.
it
You're
was
like
my
Doris.
my
It was
so
just
my kindergarten teachers. I had two female teachers, Angela and Gail,
yeah.
and I remember I was in love with Angela, and she had Birkenstocks,
They were
and
like the hosts of the Secret Garden or
oh
whatever that
yeah,
show was. What was that show?
oh yeah, it was full on like but it was like first
Pigtails and hairy armpits.
my memory my memory of first grade was my teacher was Mr. John,
Mm-hmm.
and I remember out on the playground making a giant, remember those big long those big rolls of paper
Yeah.
that you could roll out and draw on,
Yeah.
big white
It was like
sheets.
they would what they basically used to make newspapers, or maybe still do make
Oh, it's just
newspapers from.
these giant rolls of, so we made a giant yellow submarine,
Uh huh.
and we all got out on the playground and sang Yellow Submarine holding our
Yeah.
poster of the Yellow Submarine that we had drawn.
There you go. That was
And
that is night. That's early '70s New Hampshire in a
but
nutshell.
I remember too, like, this is crazy. So my parents let me go with him and his wife and his son down the Cape Cod. I don't know why, or I cannot tell you exactly why my parents allowed this to
Because your
happen.
parents were hippies too.
Yeah, well, they were a
They
little
were
older
older.
than that.
They
They
were
were, yeah.
beatniks, maybe.
But, I mean, can you imagine letting your 6-year-old go with his
No,
teacher and his wife and
it's
his kid?
crazy. But
And what was the Volkswagen, those Volkswagens that were like dune
they
buggies?
call it like the thing or something, wasn't it?
Yeah, they had a
Yeah.
thing,
Yeah, I remember that car
and that we
parked in that
drove down the
parking lot.
Cape, and I remember really, really bad, like macrobiotic food, like seaweed soup, but it wasn't good.
Yeah.
It wasn't like miso,
And
you know.
sunflower seeds.
Yeah, just
Yeah.
really crazy stuff, you
Yeah.
know.
No, so that song evokes that the anything I can pull good from that time. It evokes that time for me. So that's my second song. So now we're on what's your third song?
Number three for me. Let me. Okay, so number three for me is "My Sweet Lord," and there's a lot to talk about with this song. There's a lot of history with this. So George wrote this in '69. Obviously it's a very spiritual song. And what I love about the song is just the ending, because it's a mantra and it can just continue and
Right.
go and go and go.
It's exactly what it is. Yeah.
And what's also really interesting about the song is the involvement with Billy Preston, and you know, there's a lot going on with this song. There's obviously, I think we should probably talk about the lawsuit that
I was
happened.
just making a note. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So okay.
Which
So
is
for anyone who
BS,
doesn't
frankly.
know, George was sued because he was sued for copyright infringement because of the similarity of the song's melody to "He's So Fine," which was a 1963 hit for a songwriter named Ronnie Mack, and the song was recorded and performed by a New York City women's group called the Chiffons.
Well, you can say it was girl group then.
Yeah. Okay.
Nobody said
Well,
woman's group. Women's group was what got together and
Yeah, I
raised the money for Republican candidates
know.
in the 70s.
So what's really fascinating about this lawsuit is, so George basically said, no, I wrote this based on a public domain Christian hymn called "Oh Happy Day."
Right.
And by the way, I found that recording on Spotify, so we can put it in our playlist if we want.
Cool.
And Joan Baez actually
And
did
we'll
a
put the other
version.
one too. We'll put the
Yeah, we should put all the related songs
Yeah.
too. But so Joan Baez did a live version of "Oh Happy Day" in 1969 at the Woodstock Music and Art Fair, and that's available on Spotify as well. Which is really interesting, and this ties back to George, because George was definitely involved and spending a lot of time in Woodstock with Dylan and the band, and we can go into that later.
Right.
But what's really fascinating about this lawsuit, and we're not going to get into like musicologists at the trial. The judge apparently was considered himself some sort of a musician as well, which I'm sure
Oh,
made it
great.
interesting. But George's manager was still Alan Klein at the time.
Yeah, I
And
get the impression George, that makes sense to me that Alan Klein would litigate this thing. It seemed to me George was always like, okay, yeah, maybe you're right. Maybe it was in my subconscious, okay. I mean, he didn't seem bitter about it.
What's really fascinating about the way this shook out was, so Alan Klein is George's manager, right?
And we won't go into Alan Klein, but Alan Klein's the reason the Beatles broke up. Alan Klein is one of the most notoriously awful people in the history of rock and roll, and doesn't get enough credit for being such a piece of garbage. So please do your research on that. If anybody wants interesting, terrible stories about rock, Alan Klein's in the middle of most of them.
Yeah, and what's crazy about this story is, so he's managing George, and he started in negotiation with Bright Tunes, who own the copyright for the song, for the Chiffon song, right?
Mm-hmm.
So he was trying to buy the catalog, and they couldn't come to an agreement. So then George fires Klein, and then Klein's company was Abco, which people probably remember from the Beatles
Stones.
documentaries and all that.
Well, and the Rolling Stones.
Yeah, and so Klein's fired by George, and then he's trying to purchase the copyright, and he does. He gets the copyright to "He's So Fine." So now he's representing the other side, and he negotiates a sale of the song to Harrison. So it goes on for a while, and then in like 1981, the court finally said, well, Klein, you can't play both sides in this case. So they basically said that George only had to pay Abco like $587,000 instead of like $1.5 million, because $587,000 was the amount that Klein paid Bright Tunes for the song in '78. So basically, the court said that Klein was in breach of his fiduciary duty to George. Isn't that crazy? Like he's George's manager. George fires him, so he's like, "Fine, I'm gonna go buy the company that you're."
Sounds like an evil genius.
It's unbelievable.
Definitely. Yeah, it definitely is a piece of garbage.
And if you look, people listening can go listen to our playlist and make their own draw their own conclusion. I listened to "Oh Happy Day."
Notes. There's only so many notes and so many melodies.
Yeah, and if you listen to "Oh Happy Day," I believe George. I mean, you listen to "Oh Happy Day," and it's pretty clear.
Yeah, and frankly, the spirit of the song. This isn't some silly pop song or rock song. This is George. Not just to put him in a box. One of the most spiritual men, to achieve such fame ever. And, every story you hear, just one of the kindest people and just sensitive and, not that he wasn't competitive and wanted to be successful, but, a song like "My Sweet Lord," it's a meditation. It's a mantra. It's a religious, non-religious song.
Mm-hmm.
And, that's why I think he was just like, whatever. Maybe I
I
did.
think,
Here's a
you
check.
know, right. And, the thing going back to the source of it all, what I think is really amazing is, you have this in the song, he's singing to Krishna, and but yet the origin of the melody is from a Christian hymn. And that
Yeah.
kind of, like you said, it's like a spiritual, non-spiritual. It kind of like,
Well, that George
it's
Harrison documentary,
yeah.
there's a lot about that song and the connection. He reached out to people in the Christian movement to make sure he wasn't being disrespectful, and it was a very thoughtful song, and it still is to me.
Hmm.
It's
It's you listen to it every single time I listen to it, you can't help but just be uplifted.
yeah. Well, I will see your George Harrison, my sweet lord, and I will meet it with my own George Harrison entry, which is from a little later, 1973's "Living in the Material World," "Give Me Love," which is
Mm.
a similarly spiritual song, and it's got the usual suspects on it: Klaus Vorman and Jim Keltner and Gary Wright on organ. Um, this is his first solo record without Phil Spector. Um, and it's like My Sweet Lord. It's an uplifting song. To me, it really. I put a playlist together for a lot of my friends, and I sent it to you, Lou. I'm sure and I've been adding and subtracting from it. When we all got locked down and it just looked the grimmest of grim, I made a playlist that kind of focused on the change of emotions throughout this whole thing, from anger to sadness to being scared to being hopeful. And "Give Me Love" was one of my entries of hopefulness. And it's just an amazing song. It's got a great use of slide guitar. I just like the other songs, and then songs of Lou's. I encourage hopefully people will listen to this song again and come at it from a different angle. There's a version of that. So actually, what really impacted me with this song, and maybe really go back and listen to it, was one of the George Fest concerts that Danny Harrison put together. Ben Harper, who I'm not a huge Ben Harper fan. He's a guy I appreciate, but I really haven't listened to his music much. But Ben Harper does a version of this song that is, you can find it on YouTube. It's amazing. And he plays the slide guitar himself on it, and he channels something with the vocals. It's just an amazing cover of a song that's an amazing song. In some ways, maybe it achieves something that the song never could achieve, because it's not live. But to me, a lot of what you said about My Sweet Lord and its hopefulness and its pure, just trying to find some answers is what "Give Me Love's" all about. And it's just a great track for me.
Can we just talk about George's playing for a minute? Like his slide
Yeah,
playing.
he's underappreciated for sure as a guitar player.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily say underrated, because
No, but
I
underappreciated.
think musicians definitely know. But I was listening to him in the car today, and one of the things that I think is really fascinating about George's playing, his slide playing in particular, is like this combination of blues and sitar that comes through in his slide playing, and he kind of melds the two.
He did
And
come. That's a good point. I never really thought of that. That when he started playing the sitar and incorporating into Beatles songs here and there, which started with "Tomorrow Never Knows," or I don't know what the first song he used, "Norwegian Wood" or something. I don't know.
yeah, it would have been, yeah.
Is
Norwegian Wood, I think, was the first one
Yeah,
that I
it
recall.
did change the way he probably played guitar for
Hmm.
sure.
Yeah.
And the tone. I mean, to me, George Harrison's one of those guys, and it's not like Clapton or other players who would show up on a lot of other records. But George Harrison when you hear George Harrison.
That's exactly it. It's a sound that he created, and it's instant when you hear it. It's him. And
Yeah,
even like when they went and when Jeff Lynne and the remaining Beatles put out "Real
okay.
Love" and
And "Free as a
the other
Bird."
singles,
Yeah,
you listen to that, and it's like as soon as George starts playing that
yeah, yeah,
guitar,
yeah.
it's like, yep, Okay. And it's been mimicked and copied, and it's just so
Yeah, to
distinctive.
me, George is going to be, 100 years from now, people will be listening to the Beatles without a doubt. 200
Hmm.
years from now, will they be listening to? I mean, we'll talk about this later in some of the recap stuff, but George might get forgotten, and it's because he wasn't trying to he wasn't in competition with anybody but himself, and so there's not as much output, and there's not as much of him being everywhere and making every scene. I mean, I didn't say this, or I have it in my notes that I think Paul McCartney wakes up every morning to see if he's the last Beatle. I don't think he means it in a mean way, but I think Paul McCartney really wants to be the last Beatle. He certainly wants to be the Beatle with the most, that's done the most and is everywhere, and he's accomplished that without a doubt. But George didn't strive for that, and you can tell it
No,
in his playing too. He's not striving to fill every
he's
note.
not overplaying. It's
Right.
all, and he wrote a lot of the riffs that people don't realize that he would just come up with these parts that
Yeah,
made the songs. You
for
know.
sure.
Okay, so where are we at? We're at my
Four,
my
or what
my
you would say two.
yeah. So Working Class Hero by John.
Ah,
Getting a little darker, a little more emotional. This for me is just, it just hits me every single time I hear it, and I know the version that's out is just him with his acoustic,
right. I was
which just,
looking this song up this morning because I told you earlier I was debating one replacement song, going
yeah.
back and forth, and this was the song I almost. It's not on my list, but it was almost on my list, and doing the research, I'm actually playing the song in my head. It's it, it was hard to believe to me that it's just John and acoustic guitar,
I know.
even though you listen to it and it certainly is, but it seems so much more. It just seems like the song is bigger than the room. I mean, it's a huge song.
There's just this power to it, and there aren't a lot of chords. It's kind of a drone, you know, getting
Yeah.
back to, even going back to the topic of George
The
and
use
the
of the F
mantra,
word in it, which is
a
shocking
couple
at
of
the
times,
time. A
yeah,
couple of times, yeah. He
which
Some
I
radio
think,
stations got in trouble for playing the
got in
song.
trouble. Yeah,
Yeah.
he definitely, back then, um, and you know, it's obviously about working class people, everyday people,
Right.
and John, that's John's
Which
background.
which John was. Yeah, without a doubt
Um,
John was broken home,
yeah, he
you
was.
know,
Oh yeah, I mean,
li-
he made it. He
yeah,
and
and but fought that his whole life.
yes,
Battled with that his whole life. Like a
yeah,
song like Mother, which comes out of the same sessions, I think. It's just a painful song to listen to.
yeah. This was on the first album after the breakup. This is on the
Yeah,
Plastic Ono Band
yeah.
album,
No, and
and
reading this morning about it a little bit, which I didn't realize too, but it makes sense as soon as you listen to it. He was inspired by Dylan, by some
oh
of
yeah,
the stark, the post, Woody Guthrie era of Dylan, like Masters of War. It has that kind of vibe to it of Bob Dylan's Masters of War.
right, right. But also, there's that traditional kind of folk, influence as well coming through.
Yeah,
Um, but
great
yeah,
song.
to me, it's just, obviously it's just timeless. It's very timely now with everything going on.
It is. Yeah, it is. It
Where we're
is.
just, where a lot of people are just feeling like just used, and not just part of a one big cog.
Right. Right. And that's one of the things I had thought of in picking my songs is this a song that you listen to now and go, and it's relevant to you both sonically and just in its content, or is it very much of its time? And this song, you know, this song could come out yesterday and you'd be like, bam, makes sense.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
that's a big thing for me too, is that, I mean, I could, speaking of, what if John were still with us, I could see him doing stripped down solo
He'd
acoustic.
be on stage with Pearl Jam doing this song.
Yeah, just
Yeah.
I could see him doing this acoustic solo. I could see him just
Yeah.
cranking up and just being really full of piss and vinegar, and
Yeah.
still doing it.
Yeah, John, we said this before. John at his core, an angry guy, a mean, angry guy, which if he was a plumber would probably not help his career. But being a rock star, it's what drove him and created songs like this. And a lot of times to me, John, even in the Beatles, it seemed like John would get like 3/4 of the way there with a song and go, meh, good enough. And he'd walk away. And I think it was probably partly that anger and that frustration. But when he went all the way through, man, songs like this came out.
One of the things about John's writing that I've always loved is kind of, how he would just strip things down and get to the core. And, he wouldn't get very flowery with his lyrics. It was just straightforward, like very much like Hemingway. Just
or
if
like
I'm
Dylan.
pissed off, I'm going to tell you I'm pissed off.
Yeah, like Dylan. Listen.
Yeah.
This is John Lennon songs. Woman is the N-word of the world.
Mm-hmm.
You can't play that song now.
No, God, no.
You can't. But you listen to it and you're like, yeah, this makes sense. I mean, Patti Smith has a similar song. And recently I heard an interview with Patti, and she goes, I would like to put that song on my set list now, but my son won't let me. So, because it's relevant, and his song's relevant too, but you just can't do it. But it but because he had that's what I respect about John Lennon is he didn't give a damn. He didn't care. He was going to do what he was going to do. And if you didn't like it, oh well, if you wanted to make him silly, oh well. Or if you wanted to think he was, too raw, no problem. He didn't care. Right. He's going to do what he did. No, it's a great song. Good choice. So once again, we're in step. We're in lockstep. I almost replaced this song with "Working Class Hero," which I'm glad I didn't now. My John Lennon entry is number 9, "Dream," from Walls and Bridges, 74 on Apple Records. This is from Walls and Bridges was conceived, written, and recorded during John Lennon's Lost Weekend, which is the 18 months he and Yoko were separated. And Yoko gave him a concubine, basically, to take care of him.
A hall pass.
In May Pang. May Pang, who I've met, by the way.
No, you're kidding me.
She was at a Carmine. I work with Carmine Appice, the drummer, or Carmine Appice, depends on how you want to say it. And Carmine had a record coming out, and he had a release party, and she was at it. Now, I didn't really talk to her. I just was like, oh, my God, that's May Pang.
How did you not go talk to her?
Because it was a crazy scene, man. I talked to Mark Hudson from the Hudson Brothers.
Okay.
And Paul Schaefer was there. It was a weird night, man.
Yeah, that's a whole separate conversation.
But yeah. So I met May Pang just for like a second, just like, hey, like I was looking at her. She goes, "Yes, I know you know I'm May Pang. Don't talk to me, please." So
did she have a name tag on her shirt?
No, but she she just gets people that gush to her about John Lennon, and weird.
Yeah, of course.
And plus, when the way John died, I'm sure she's had her share of weirdos approach her.
Yeah, of course.
And she's on the song. She's the one doing the whispery John, blah, 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 on the song. She's on it. That's her. Jim Keltner, Klaus Vormann again. Jimmy Iovine engineered the recording session.
Where did they track that?
In LA? The record plant.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was going to say, because he was
That's
out
why
in
Jimmy
California
was there, because that's
right?
where he worked.
Yeah.
May Pang said it was John's favorite song on the album. And, the nonsense lines that, oh, bawa kawa, pose, is just, he came to him in a dream. That's how the song kind of started. It was just a silliness, psychedelic nonsense that kind of came to him in a dream. Just like he does on Across the Universe, just like he does on I Am the Walrus. He kind of is known for, kind of just making a language up and putting it in his songs. I mean, maybe that's where the whistling comes from. I don't know. But to me, that song, it's a lot different from Working Class Hero in that it's much more produced, obviously. It's got, a lot of layers of sounds and the whole thing. But it's just an amazing song that kind of comes out of it's one of those songs you're like, how did this song even occur? Like, how did this happen? Like, me as a non-musician, one of the things I find most frustrating is like, I don't understand how that person did that. Like, how did that happen? How did they put those words together? I mean, it just, to me, it's one of those songs that you marvel at it. And it's certainly, of all the solo works, it's probably my favorite John. That and probably Working Class Hero, my favorite John Lennon solo songs. And it's an interesting time in John's life. It's very well documented in a couple different documentaries and books, obviously. And it was a very creative time for John. And being away from Yoko, I don't know, seemed to help. I just know, a lot of times you feel like his stuff with Yoko, he's trying so hard to include Yoko that it was hard for him to be totally free. And he wasn't collaborating with people like he was during that Lost Weekend in LA, where he was working with Harry Nilsson, he was working with David Bowie, he was working with Elton John and different people. And it's just an amazing time, and the album is very good all the way through, and this song, Number 9 Dream, is just great. All right, last song.
So we're down to our last songs.
Here's your last one.
I was trying to remember if we wanted to talk about anything else before we dug into the last picks.
I got stuff at the end here. I want that we can go through to kind of recap. So
okay,
if it comes up, it comes up.
So my number one song on my top 5 is "All Things Must Pass."
Okay, that makes sense. Seems like an easy pick, though.
Yeah, Danny just released literally just released, I think this week, a new mix.
Danny Harrison, by the way, creepy resemblance. Not that sons don't look like their fathers, but my boys don't look like me. It's amazing
how much he looks like his dad. Yeah,
it's shocking. Frankly,
yeah.
It's shocking how much he looks like his father.
Yeah, and it seems like Danny's doing a really good job of caring for the catalog.
He is. He's not. They have not gone nuts, releasing stuff and getting stupid. He really seems very respectful of the catalog and of what.
And this new mix is really nice. It kind of brings George's voice out a bit more to the front.
I have to check that out.
Yeah, it'll be in our playlist. It's really nice. So the All Things Must Pass album as a whole was recorded between May and October of 1970. So obviously, when the Beatles broke up, he was ready to go right away. He had all this material ready to go, and he was right in. They recorded at 3 different studios: Abbey Road, Trident, and Apple. Phil Spector again was the producer on the track. It's interesting. You go back and you listen. This was a track that had some of the demos were pretty sloppy. Not really. And I think this was a track that the Beatles passed on.
Yeah, I think so.
What's interesting, I had forgotten about this, but Billy Preston actually released this before George released it. And so that was out there, and then George gonna put it out. Some of the same people we've been talking about in the podcast were on this. Ringo played drums and tambourine. Klaus is on bass.
Yep.
Eric Clapton joined him on acoustic.
It's funny too when you think about, people, especially the more famous collaborations that are on the solo work. You got to dig. It's not in the liner notes.
Yeah.
It's not in the liner notes generally, which, in today's world of everybody trying to grab credit and making sure they're getting their share seems odd. But, thinking about a future podcast, one of these, I was listening to a Neil Young song, Heart of Gold, and, the background vocals on that are James Taylor and Linda Ronstadt.
Linda Ronstadt, yeah.
And just because they were in town, and they're not credited in the liners, I don't think. It's just one of those things.
They may be now, but
but at the time they were. I don't think they were. No.
Yeah, it was just just that scene and who was around, and yet it was a perfect fit for that song.
Yeah, and they were always hanging out. I mean, you see that in the documentaries.
Yeah.
they were always Keltner's in the other room. Oh, I'll have him come over,
Yeah,
and
right. Yeah, it's just a bunch of friends. Billy Preston actually played piano on this track.
well, a lot you could argue Billy Preston was the fifth Beatle in a lot of ways.
Yeah,
Um,
well, and again, going back to My Sweet Lord, and there's I don't know how much Billy contributed to the writing of that, but for all things must pass. This actually the lyrical inspiration was actually from a Timothy Leary poem. Um, and I think that with this song again, it's kind of like for me, it's like this combination of how he captures this joyousness and this kind of lifting, but also this ache and melancholy.
right,
And
right.
I think that's kind of what keeps it for me so timeless.
I agree. I agree. Good choice. Good choice. All right. So my last song, and once again, mine weren't really in an order, but so my last song, I'm going back to Paul McCartney. Um, and I don't think anybody in a million years would choose this song, but it just it's a vivid song in my life, and I go back and listen to it a lot. I never listened to the album it's from. No More Lonely Nights, Paul McCartney.
Wow.
1984. It was from a soundtrack to this weird movie Paul and Ringo made. David Gilmour plays guitar on it, which is David Gilmour's one of those guys you're like, that's David Gilmour. It's just an amazing guitar tone and solos on this song. There's an extended version of the song with just crazy solo that just fades out and finishes the song. The movie was this concept of a day in the life of Paul with Linda and Ringo, and it's a terrible movie. But most of the rest of the soundtrack is Paul redoing a couple of his solo songs and Beatles songs, and switching the credit, by the way, from Lennon-McCartney to McCartney-Lennon, which
Interesting.
he was not allowed to do, by the way. He's tried a couple times to get Yoko to agree to that the songs he wrote to go McCartney-Lennon, and the songs John
I
wrote to go
wouldn't
Lennon-McCartney.
I wouldn't think that was even a
I don't
thing.
know if it's still, but he did it at the time. But beyond that fact that I do love the song and I listen to it, and I think the most vivid part of it is when we got MTV in where we grew up. And I don't know why this is or what, but it was simulcast on FM radio. So I would listen to MTV way more than I watched it. It was always on in my room. And at that time, MTV, in the early 80s, every song they played would be a song you kind of like. So even the more mainstream stuff. And so that song was in heavy rotation at that time on MTV. And I just remember I'd listened to it so many times, and I would just, karaoke along to the guitar solo with a broken hockey stick, pretend I was playing the guitar. And do you remember that MTV being simulcast on FM?
I don't remember that, actually.
I don't know I can't remember how I even knew it was happening. I think I was just one of those guys that was always
That was
flipping the radio.
so this song is from the Give My Regards to Broad Street
Give My Regards
album.
to Broad Street album,
Yeah.
which is a soundtrack to that terrible film. But the video of it is interesting because the video is basically, the trailer of the movie. But it's, it's just, I just love the song. And it's probably because of Gilmour, this got a great guitar sound, which is unlike anything else Paul McCartney did as a solo artist.
Right.
Gilmour in it. He didn't do a lot of that stuff. A lot of Paul's collaborations are god awful, which I'll bring up here in a minute. But to me, that's just, I just love that song, and I encourage people to go back and listen to it just for the Gilmour guitar and David Gilmour from Pink Floyd. It's just amazing to me. So that's my last song. I do have one honorable mention, and it's only because I had this cassette, John Lennon in New York City. It was a recording of a Madison Square concert. He did like 3 or 4 shows over like Christmas, and like 71 or something. And the album, those recordings still exist on other records, but this version of it doesn't exist anymore. And I had this cassette. His version of Cold Turkey on that album. On that live album, which Cold Turkey is his song about quitting heroin, is it's amazing. I couldn't put it on my list. It just didn't fit on my list, but to me that I'll put it on the playlist. But
I know. I
it's
feel like the honorable mention list for me is like pulling a thread on a sweater. It's just
well,
gonna
then you could
work.
go. I could have 50 songs. Yeah,
I
you just
know.
keep going. So
I will say this though, that so the only place I could find this version of "Nobody Loves You When You're Down and Out" by John is on YouTube, where it strips out all the strings. It's just him and an acoustic again. And
what album is the studio version of that on?
I don't remember. Um,
It's on one of the Phil Spector records.
it's a That's exactly why I like the
It's
version,
on
because
Mind Games or something.
yeah, it might be. But it's basically it's a stripped out, just vocal and acoustic version somebody posted. I don't know how they got it or what, um, but that specific version, again, it goes back to just John feeling like you're in a room with John alone, is why I love that. And just it's got the classic chord progression that John just was so good at that John was so good at doing. And so that would be, if I had an honorable mention, one track, it would probably be that one, but it has to be that
It's on
version.
Walls and Bridges, which I
Yeah.
should have known. It's on Walls and Bridges. Yeah, I agree. All right, so let's. So we're about an hour in here. So poor Billy, our producer. Hopefully he likes the Beatles or he's killing himself. So all right, so let's final analysis here. I got some things.
You got some categories.
So, yeah. So who's had the best solo career overall?
Well, I mean, I think we have to exclude 1980 on, unfortunately, right?
Yeah, maybe, but even so, you could, and to that point, to me, if you're just making a non-emotional choice just based on the facts, it's Paul McCartney. I mean, you can't.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about career overall.
Yeah, I mean, Paul as a solo artist sold way more records than the Beatles sold.
Yeah.
So, I mean, at one point he was in the Guinness Book of World Records of having the most record sales. So
yeah,
he's got to be Paul. I mean, yeah, you could go in and dissect it and make an emotional choice here or a critical choice, but it's got to be Paul's had the best solo career.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and
he's still, regardless of what you think of the material, he's still working and still relevant, and he's still working with current artists.
Right. Well, for sure. Yeah, and he's very relevant still, and he's made himself that way. Listen, yeah. I think Paul is I think at the core of Paul McCartney, he's a very, grounded and good man. I mean, you hear stories of all the time of, people meet him and they start freaking out, and he goes, "I know, I understand. Hold on a minute, just wait, and it'll pass, and we can have a conversation."
Yeah, I mean,
so. Yeah, it's Paul. And as far as the best solo catalog goes, it's Paul too, because it's just so much, and he's had so many hits, and you just can't deny it. It just is. It's just the way it is. You can't, you can argue it based on critical, your own personal thoughts, but you can't argue it really. It's Paul.
Mm-hmm.
So, best solo album. Of all the solo albums, which one's the best one to you?
I mean, this is tough for me, obviously.
But it shouldn't be tough for you because you've got a bunch of songs from it.
Well, I mean, I got to go with George and All Things Must Pass.
No, you're right.
But I have to qualify it. I feel like this comes back to, having another producer involved. I mean, I feel like that album was too long. I think if you...
Oh, it's way too long. Yeah.
I mean, if you edit down the tracks to the best, then you get one incredible, kind of standard length album, and strip away some of the other tracks.
Yeah. Well, every double album is too long.
It's almost like it's almost like 3 EPs.
Yeah.
It's just, but for me, I mean, that's the one I just go back to again and again.
Yeah, you're right. A close second might be Band on the Run, but All Things Must Pass which is surprising. Neither of us picked a song from Band on the Run, by the way.
Well, I mean, I love that song too. It's just not in my top 5.
No, I agree. So good. We're so far we're 3 for 3. We're agreeing here. Best. Okay, here we go. Let's get into it. Best use of significant other.
Well,
now, let me go first on this.
All right, you go first.
My answer is George, because he's had 2 main significant others in his career, Patty, and then I'm sorry, I can't remember
Olivia.
her name, but Olivia, right, who was his wife for most of his life, and when he passed away. They weren't they're not on his records. They're on his records in the way that everybody sings about their spouse, and is inspired by their spouse, good and bad. He wasn't trying to force his, and maybe it's from, of course, Patty Boyd is in Help. She's got like a teeny part in Help, and I think that's how he met her. But
I thought it was Hard Day's Night.
Hard Day's Night. I'm sorry. Yeah,
Yeah.
Hard Day's Night. She's in Hard Day's Night, which I just rewatched a couple weeks ago. But so I think it's George, because he didn't force his wife to play keyboards or get a terrible mullet like himself, or make weird noises in the backgrounds of songs. So Chuck Berry gives you the weird side eye. It's
Oh, that's a classic.
And Ringo
That's a classic video, by
being
the
in
way.
movies with his wife. If you need any example of one of the worst decisions that cocaine and alcohol drove, go see Caveman the movie. So yeah, to me it's George, because he left
I would
them out.
agree. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's addition by subtraction, basically.
All right, so now I got a category: high points and low points. All right, so Paul McCartney, what is his solo high point in his career, do you think?
It's got to be between 1970 and 76.
Can you point to one thing?
No.
So I would agree in the same time frame to a certain degree. Well, yes and no. I think the recording Wings Over America.
I mean, for me, it feels like just Paul's solo career, but the Wings kind of just
well, that's
whole
why that
span.
Wings Over America. It's a triple live album. It's got Beatles songs on it. It's got the best of his early solo work. It's got Wings songs on it. To me, that's the kind of the overview high point. That and a little, obviously much later in his career, doing the Super Bowl halftime. Seems like it was an apex. So Paul, low points for Paul. The low point of Paul McCartney's solo career.
Well, I mean, I think it goes back to the film and probably
give my regards to Broad Street.
Yeah, just
I can go lower. It goes lower.
Okay. What do you got?
The duets with Stevie Wonder and Michael Jackson.
Oh, yeah, the Michael Jackson duet probably would be
Say. Which in itself is not a horrible song.
Honestly,
but the music video
so
is racist at best, by the way.
Yeah, I wouldn't go say. I actually would say The Girl Is Mine.
Oh, that's even worse.
Was even worse.
And that's not a Paul album. That's a Mike album, MJ album.
That's Thriller.
Yeah. Ugh. And Ebony and Ivory. Oh my God.
Yeah.
So,
I don't know who was advising him on that stuff at the time.
I don't know either, but that's to me.
The Doggone Girl Is Mine is just.
Oh. MTV. I say this a lot, but MTV. There's about 10 artists who were the coolest of anything ever could be, and then MTV came along, and for some reason, they're all in their 40s at this point. These guys from their 60s and early 70s, and it becomes a cash grab for them. So MTV just made guys like Paul McCartney, Phil Collins, Clapton to a degree, Steve Winwood. It just made them look just ridiculous. It just
compared to The Girl Is Mine, Say is a pretty good song.
It's a good catchy. No, the song is a good song actually. It's just that video is just
I know.
Oh, it's so bad. All right, John, high point.
Man, I gotta say Double Fantasy for me.
Double Fantasy.
I mean, I feel like he was coming out of something and he was positive.
He was. Yeah, you're right.
He was really in a good place. That's what makes the whole thing so tragic. He was really, he turned 40. He was, everything was, it just felt like he was poised for so much more,
You're right. And
the songs were great. To
me, the high point, I mean, the Lost Weekend, I could argue for the Lost Weekend being a high point in his career as a solo artist. But unfortunately, I think it's post-mortem. It's the Imagine documentary, which if you haven't seen it, you need to see it. It is such a John and Yoko made this weird decision in like 1968 that we're going to just keep a camera rolling on us. And at that time, it was not easy to do. It's not like now.
That
And
was like the first.
they were
Were they
starring
like
in
one of
their
the
own
first?
reality shows.
Yeah, right. I mean,
Yeah.
and that was like 16 millimeter film, which
All the time. They were
yeah.
there's so much film of John Lennon that the Imagine documentary was put together with him narrating it. There's no narrator. He narrates the film because there's so much content of him. It's crazy. But the movie is just remarkable and sad, obviously, but and very honest. And it's unfortunate. It's after he dies. It's a good 10 years after he died, I think it came out. But to me, that's the high point for John. Low point, John Lennon. Mike Douglas show, is it?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough for me to. I mean, low point for me probably. I guess I'd have to think about, like, kind of maybe the Lost Weekend, because he was, or when he
might
was
have been
kind of
it could, in reflection, might have been his personal low point.
low point.
To me, I don't know that he had a chance to have a low point.
Creative low point. I don't know if he ever. I don't know.
Well, that's what I say. I don't think he had the chance.
Yeah.
He didn't get poisoned by MTV and things like
no.
other artists did.
I feel like he probably, between him and, I mean, George even got with when he got into like the late 80s, he kind of got roped into a bit of that commercial sound.
Right.
I mean, he had a hit with Jeff Lynne, but
well, to me, we'll go into George now, and we'll go back. We'll go the opposite way. My George Harrison low point is all that stuff with Jeff Lynne. To me, Jeff Lynne, and I know he's a huge Beatles fan. I know he's a super talented guy, but to me, it's like, okay, we're gonna make a computer that can make Beatles songs. That's Jeff Lynne. And it's not quite the Beatles, but it's not. It's just, there's something in there that makes you like it until you start really listening. And you're like, you know what? This is empty. It's soulless.
It's I mean, Got My Mind Set on You, and like, I mean, that, like, I loved George's work with the Wilburys. I felt like that was a really great period for him. But yeah, I would agree, the Jeff Lynne kind of solo George, that, like, I think it was 87 when that came out.
Yeah, I think so. That stuff.
Now that to me was pretty
bad.
Pretty bad. Yeah.
And what's his high point then? What's George's solo high point? You go back to All Things Must Pass.
Yeah, I have to go back to that. I feel like that was just. It was like the clouds opened up and the sun came out, and he was just allowed to flourish.
It's like what they say about your first, even though he had made many albums and was very famous, you spend your whole life writing your debut album. And it
wasn't even his. I mean, he considered it his debut album, but it technically wasn't.
No, it technically wasn't.
But that really was. I mean, his.
In a non-musical way, the high point for me for George Harrison is that appearance he does on SNL, which is a running joke that runs over a couple weeks of SNL, where Lorne Michaels goes on and says, he offers up $3,000 for the Beatles to reunite on the SNL. And there's an urban myth, and it might be true, that Paul was actually with John in the Dakota hanging out, and they saw it live, and they debated, should we go downtown and just show up there?
God.
But they figured out by the time we get there, it would be too late. So, but the week or two later, George Harrison's on as the musical guest, and he asks for his $3,000, and he goes, well, you're only one of the Beatles, so I'm only going to give you $750 or something. It's just hilarious that George had such a sense of humor about himself and the Beatles and the perspective to, and that was, 75, 76. So it wasn't like, it was only a few years after they broke up. So,
yeah.
All right, Ringo, I already said my low point, which is You're 16, You're Beautiful in Your Mind. This is the worst song ever recorded. And frankly, it's Paul McCartney's.
Doesn't hold up.
It's Paul McCartney's number 2 low point because he helped him on the song. He's non-credited, but he's on that song.
Yeah.
And it's the worst. It's the worst. I mean, can you find a worse low point for Ringo?
No, I'd have to say that's pretty bad, yeah.
All right. So high point for Ringo.
For me, I would say Right Now. I mean, Ringo's touring. He's got a great band. He looks great.
Yeah.
I mean, he
I
looks better than I look,
I
I
can't
mean, he's
disagree.
just doing,
I
he's
can't
just,
disagree with that. The only thing I would say is I would dial it back a little bit. Those first three All Star tours, I think were his high point as a solo artist. Then now it's gotten a little silly, but because he's done
well, I mean,
a
what is he,
dozen of them
80? I
now.
mean,
He is exact. I looked it up. He's the exact same age as my dad within a week. My dad was born June 30th, 1940. He was born July 7th, 1940. So he's 80 years old.
yeah, think about it. Look at him
It's
at 80
shocking.
years
Yeah,
old,
it's shocking.
and he's still out there playing with a pretty killer band,
Yep.
and continuing to just it's yeah, I mean, it's
Yeah.
just
Still married to the same woman he's been married to since
yeah,
his mid 70s. By the way, his brother-in-law, Joe Walsh.
that's right. And
Yep.
he just played drums on Steve Lukather's new single.
Oh, really?
Um
Steve
and
Lukather from Toto, by the
yeah,
way.
and it
Yeah.
sounds great. I mean, it's definitely got a 60s vibe, and I mean, it's just amazing.
Well, I'm going to channel my inner Stuart Smalley here and say this is a good show. I think we did a good job, Lou.
Yeah, I think
I,
this is
I think we
fun,
did. I feel
and
good about this. I feel good. I'm gonna drop this on you. Who won the episode, Lou versus Mike?
oh, come on.
I'm gonna say it's. I think you won.
I think you
I
really
think you
shocked me
won.
with your list. I
You
really
you pulled it out at the end with all things must pass versus my no more lonely nights. Even though I'll stand by no more lonely nights, but I think you won.
I really cannot believe your list. I would not, if I had put money, I would have lost all my money,
Well,
because none of your five I would have picked for you.
and I listen, and I'm not trying to be a contrarian. I stand by. Those are songs I very much, especially Heart of the Country and No More Lonely Nights, and but all the songs, and I think you too. I think they're songs that we revisit and listen to. Like I said, we're gonna make a playlist and share it with everybody. This is our first shot at this, our first episode. We've got a lot of good ideas to do future ones. Hopefully, we're looking forward to sharing this with everybody, and we're looking forward to doing more. Anything, Lou, you want to say in wrapping up?
No, man, this is a lot of fun. I'm really happy to be part of it, and I'm looking forward to the next one.
All right, goodbye, everybody. Thanks a lot.
Hey everyone, thanks for listening. We hoped you enjoyed it as much as we did. If you liked what you heard, go to our website, www.the5v5podcast.com, where you can find our social media and YouTube links to see and hear more of what we talked about today. See you next time.